Perfect. I think that's the majority of everyone in there now. So I suppose first things first, welcome to everyone, and thanks very much for joining us on the stream this afternoon. I'm sure we were all delighted to receive the news last week of athletics being one of the first sports to, I suppose, make the first step on the ladder as such. So I suppose before we get started, just some housekeeping. So obviously all of your audio has been set to mute. So if everyone could just keep that on mute for the duration of the webinar. There is a text chat box there for anyone that would like to submit any questions. So we're going to run through the questions that were submitted in advance. And then if we have time at the end, we will try and run through some of those questions on the chat box as well. We're going to try and keep it to about 30 minutes or so, just to ensure that we can kind of get through everything pretty quickly. So the webinar will be recorded and we'll be sharing it on our YouTube channel straight afterwards. So if anyone has to pop out or can't, or if any of your colleagues couldn't make it, you can let them know that will be there. So just a quick outline. So we will, as I said, run through the questions that you submitted as a starting point, and we'll work down through them kind of one by one. And look, there is kind of obviously a great deal of kind of overlapping on the questions that were there. So hopefully it'll kind of touch on all the points that people were querying over the last couple of days. So obviously I'd like to introduce three members to the discussion. I'm sure you're all pretty familiar with them at this stage. So we have our CEO, Hamish Adams, our Director of Coaching and Development, Pat Ryan, and then our National Children's Officer and HR Manager, Kieron Stout. So I hope I got all those titles correct there, lads. Yeah. Hamish, we might start with you. Obviously, very encouraging news for us last week, and I suppose we were all given a bit of a lift, the fact that athletics was offered the chance to make the first step on the ladder, I suppose, to whatever the new normal may be.
Thanks, Dara. Yes, look, it's fantastic news that we're back in operation with within very limited guidelines, and obviously a warm welcome to everyone here tonight, and hopefully we can shed some further light on those guidelines, because I appreciate there is a lot of rules and regulations laid down by government, but they have done that for a reason. We still have COVID-19 with us. We are still very aware of the need to ensure that our social distancing, our contact tracing and our hygiene is spot on, because we do not want to spread COVID any further. So I look at it as a privilege to be able to open up within these restricted guidelines. And they are, I would note, they are guidelines. Look, we're all learning. This is new to us. And these are recommended guidelines that we are asking all our members to adhere to for best practice. So we're not going to be actively policing them. No one's going to be fined, but there is a big responsibility on us in the sport of athletics to ensure that we do operate to a really high level in those areas of contact tracing, social distancing and hygiene. So Dara, back to you.
Thanks for that, Hamish. So look, we might run down through the questions that were submitted in advance. I suppose that's probably the quickest way to get, I suppose, the information that people were looking for. As I said, there is a fairly decent amount of questions to get through, so we'll keep the answers pretty brief. So, Pat, I might start with yourself there, and this is kind of, I suppose, in terms of facilities that we saw a number of questions come in about. Just so in terms of the possibility of groups going out in four to use separate areas of the track, and taking into account obviously the spatial and hygiene regulations, would you have any update in terms of how clubs can go about that?
Well, thanks, Tara. That's actually one of the first questions, and possibly the most common question we got in the first couple of days. I'm going to say yes, that clubs can operate with a number of groups around the track. If you're working with a typical 400-meter track, you could quite easily have maybe one group at the long jump pit, maybe other at the high jump if you're lucky enough to have the facilities. And on the actual track itself, you could, in theory, have maybe two groups of sprinters, one on the top of the back straight, and one on the bottom, going in different directions in different lanes, and subsequently also on the home straight as well. That could be done. if it's throwing, you know, it's possible to have a group there on the infield. Really, it depends on the facilities you've got and the numbers. But yes, it is possible to have multiple groups in operation at the same time. And Kieron will touch on that later. Probably a good idea to have a couple of groups rather than simply one, because it means that from the welfare point of view, you're covered as well.
Perfect. And in terms of the equipment that might be used at training or that, Pat, in terms of should athletes bring their own throw equipment? Obviously, do they have to collect their own throws, etc.? What advice is there for that?
Yes, look, in an ideal scenario, if the athletes have their own throwing implements that they can bring them to training, throw them, retrieve them, and use them again, and take them away, that reduces the instance of cleaning implements between throws. So yes, best that one person uses their implements, or really that the contact of implements and equipment is reduced, so that it's less cleaning and therefore less opportunity for contamination.
Perfect. And as I said, we'll be kind of touching on these areas down through some more of the questions, so there will be a little back and forth and a bit of overlapping on it. Hamish, one for you, just in terms of the opening of indoor facilities for, say, the pole vault and then some of our other athletic tracks. Is there any update in terms of where we are at this stage?
Unfortunately, no, Dara. There is no update on the opening of the indoor facilities at this stage. We have been focused on phase one initially with the information that we've shared with our membership, and there'll be more information up there in the morning that we'll talk through in the next few minutes. But indoor activity will be limited to phase 4 or phase 5 of the lockdown exit, and we still don't have the specific details around that at this stage. I would note that phase 1, remember, is constrained to within 5 kilometres of the club. Phase 2 and phase 3 are restricted to 20 kilometres. And then phase 4, it will depend on how phases 1, 2, and 3 go. So I think there's still a fair bit of water to flow under the bridge until we get to phase 4.
Yeah. And Hamish, just in terms of obviously collecting of membership fees, etc., for the end of the year, just a question there: should clubs still be collecting membership fees at this point?
Definitely, Dara. Obviously, the advantage of membership is key, from insurance to access to coach education to the resources within the RDO team and the expertise within Athletics Ireland. So we would encourage everyone to register. Members should not be in your club if they are not registered members of the club, and hopefully of Athletics Ireland as well, because I know one of the other future questions, and I'll go back to it, is around competition, and we'll talk about that again in a minute.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Hamish. And then Kieron, just one for you there in terms of the appointment of a safety officer. Is there any qualifications required, or do they need any medical qualifications for answering queries relating to COVID? And what does the AI insurance cover if a safety officer should encounter an incident related to COVID? So Hamish, that might be one for you to jump in afterwards as well.
Okay, I'll deal with the medical one first. There are no medical requirements for a safety officer to perform within the club. The role will be appointed by the management committee to appoint a safety officer, and possibly the word compliance, COVID compliance officer, is a bit more friendly around it. And this is a new role for everybody, and we're specifying in terms of the yellow document for clubs. You'll see in item number 1 for the club document, it sets out what the tasks are that the safety officer is going to be looking after, but they're to be supported by the club in that work. You may choose to have a multiple of them within the club structure, depending if you work in different sites. And I would say, to sort of give a snapshot of their role, it's really looking to, one, enhance or to deliver the social distancing within the club. So to make sure the groups are maintaining social distance, whether they're multiple groups or one single group within the club. And then looking at the hygiene, a good practice around hygiene, encouraging athletes to take responsibility and coaches to take responsibility for that. And I think the third one, which is very important, is the registration, because the registration is where HSE will go to if there is to be contact tracing. So capturing the details of the actual attendees on the night or at the session, so that if there is a requirement to go contact tracing in that particular group, that it's easy and quick to do so. That information would remain in the club. It doesn't need to be sent to us, or it doesn't need to be sent anywhere. It needs to be held by that compliance officer in case there is contact tracing required.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Kieron. So there's a couple of, quick fire questions here now. Hamish, just clubs wondering in terms of a booking software or app.
Yeah, we are in discussions with Eventmaster. Many of you will be familiar with Eventmaster, who we use for our membership registration and events. They are working on something, and we will have information to you next week. Obviously, there is some time required to develop the login system. Will be very user friendly and will allow clubs, individual clubs, to have their own system and their members to log on for contact tracing, because as Kieron noted, we need to be very, very vigilant as to who is attending the club during those times, so that in the event, worst case scenario, if someone had presented and was subsequently diagnosed with COVID-19, that we have a physical record of everyone that they have been in contact with. So that's really, really important that those records are maintained, and the system will be available in the coming days for you.
Perfect. I suppose a topic that's to the forefront of a lot of, I suppose, athletes, coaches, and I suppose the athletics community in general. Hamish, in terms of competition and what the outlook is for, I suppose, the next couple of months or so.
We certainly want to get back to competition, both on a regional and a national level, and we are working towards that. I'd have to say the competition committee have been ultra busy in terms of discussions. There's been a deliberate policy not to publish dates, and as you can understand why the situation is so fluid in terms of, look, we're on the first week of lockdown exit. Phase 5 of the lockdown exit is the 10th of August. So we will not have competition before the 10th of August. That is the only decision that we have made. And obviously, getting to the 10th of August and exit is dependent upon everything going really well for us as a nation, and COVID not spreading or any further outbreaks. So we definitely have plans. We want competition. We want competition within our recreational department as well as our regular competitions, and we are working towards that. But unfortunately, I don't want to give out any dates and then have to, once we have a date written in stone, have to revisit that. But as soon as we are confident that competition can go ahead, we will advise all.
And I suppose along the theme of competition, obviously there is a big event scheduled for December 13th of this year, and we're still very much working towards the European Cross Country Championships, which are scheduled to be held there in the National Sports Campus.
Yeah, just to add, Dara, look, we're 7 months away. Sport Ireland, who've been fantastic in terms of supplying us with information and assistance, John Tracy and his team, they certainly want the event to go ahead. We want the event to go ahead. European Athletics want the event to go ahead if it possibly can. And so do the Minister Griffin in the Department of Transport, Tourism and Sport has also been very supportive in terms of getting athletics up and running this week, but also very supportive of hosting the European Cross Country Championship in Fingal, Dublin in December. I think potentially it could be one of the first major events for the year. So that's exciting for us to work towards.
Yeah, I think it'd be a great celebration of athletics and sport in general if it can can go ahead at the end of the year. Pat, I'll just revert back to yourself there. So a couple of more specific questions. Just in terms of a large club that might have a large number of adults and juveniles, how can they safely return to training and abide by social distancing? I know you've touched on it there in your previous answer.
Yeah, this is going to be a real concern for a number of clubs, especially those that have large numbers. And the answer is in some cases it will be difficult. The clubs are going to have to maintain groups of 4, and in most of those, in all those cases, that's going to include one coach. So obviously they're going to have to carry out an audit of their coaching resources, because multiples will be required to keep numbers out. And also another factor will be the nature of the facilities that they've got. Will that allow a return to training? I mentioned previously in some of the previous questions about groups around different areas of the tracks. That's in best case scenario. There will be cases when that's not really possible, due to the actual size of the facility. So in summary, really, what the clubs will need to do is carrying out an audit of their coaching resources, then assess the requirements, the needs that the groups of athletes actually have, allocate the coaches to those respective groups within the constraints of their facilities. So really, I know it's a general answer, but it'll depend on what resources are available to them and how much time and energy those coaches have for maybe multiple sessions. And all of this has to be done within the constraints that the government have laid down. One thing I would say, and I'll put my salesman's hat now, if there's clubs that are maybe struggling to get activities for some of the younger kids, the RDO team are launching a challenge over a 4-week challenge at the moment. In some cases it went out last week, in some cases it's going out this week. So that might provide some activities that the younger members can stay busy with until we move to phase 2 and 3 and beyond that. So hopefully that will contact your local RDO for details there, folks.
Perfect. Thanks, Pat. Kieron, I might just jump back to you, and Hamish, feel free to jump in here as well. Just in terms of, do clubs need any signed declarations from parents or athletes that all requirements are and will be met before returning to training?
Well, the registration is the important piece there. That does need to be completed by a parent on behalf of a child or by an athlete themselves. That would be the most important document that would be involved in this process.
Perfect. That's perfect, Kieron. And obviously, Kieron, I might stay with you just in terms of phase 1. Obviously, is for athletes over 13 years of age, and it's for groups of 4. What would be the age limit for phase 2, or is there any indication of what that might be?
At the moment, it's 13 years and upwards, and it's going to remain that way for the short term. It'll be reviewed as we go through the phases, but at the moment, we're just working with 13 years and upwards.
Perfect. And Hamish, just in terms of then the group sizes for, I suppose, phases going forward, there's just a question there. Is there any indication that group sizes might be increased for the future phases?
Not yet, Darren. I think that will evolve over time, and hopefully as we continue to keep the COVID-19 under control. But at this stage, I appreciate how limiting it is with 4 people, but that's all the guidance we have at this point in time.
Perfect. And in terms of groups that are training together, Hamish, I might go back to you on this one. Does every group of 3 require a coach, or can groups of 3 work together, abiding by social distancing guidelines, etc., with a supervising adult who isn't a coach?
Look, I think as long as that supervising member is a member of the club and the club committee have signed off on that person, that they're GARDA vetted and that they meet all the appropriate criteria, I couldn't see why not to support the club through this initial phase there. Again, these are guidelines. It goes back to common sense, and I think as long as the club does have some checks and balances in place, like GARDA vetting, like club membership, etc., then that's positive for the club.
Yeah, I suppose on that theme here, and I might pop back to yourself there.
Sure.
Just in terms of, does the supervising adult have to be GARDA vetted, or can the club parent supervising the COVID club protocols, social distancing, etc.? So I think what they're asking there is basically, can a parent supervise as opposed to a coach, and do they need to be Garda vetted?
Well, this is a club appointment, so again, it needs to be somebody who's registered with the club, appointed by the management committee, or a number of people, as mentioned earlier. They should be vetted and have their safeguarding training and some basic coaching qualifications done. So if we think of them in terms of the volunteer in the club who is assisting and working with athletes, the safeguarding principles remain. So no, in the sense of a parent just standing in to take over that role. It's too important a role within the club, and we do need to have some consistency with it as well.
Perfect. There's just a question there in terms of a point of contact in Athletics Ireland. Who should we get in contact with should questions arise? Obviously, Hamish, there's a full list of contact details for each of the relevant departments on the website, and as Pat mentioned earlier, the RDO's details are also up there, so we'd point anyone in that direction. And there's one there as well, just in terms of, do you think it would be possible, or are there any plans to set up a contact list of COVID officers within clubs so we can share advice on how clubs are dealing with it? So, Kieron, maybe that's one for yourself.
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely, we can start to. What we could do very early on is, once we get into the first week of this, is put a message out to clubs to let them tell us who their COVID compliance officer is, so that we can put them into some form of a group, so we can share information quickly or disseminate information directly to them. Same way we do with our children's officers and with other officers within the club. So yes, we can certainly do that.
Perfect. Just flicking down through some of the questions here. There's just some questions in terms of the booking app, Hamish. Just in terms of, will the app be free or will it be a paid offering? So I know the guys in Eventmaster are still working on that for us at the minute.
Yeah, no, it will be free. We did look at a number of options, and we're fortunate that Eventmaster can do this because they are quite expensive to buy, and that's why we will take the cost of that, so it will be free to use to the clubs.
Perfect.
And as I said, it will be for each individual club will have their own login, and it will be a confidential system as well for them to retain details for the contact tracing.
Perfect. And we've just a couple of additional questions here. Is there any update on Morton Stadium, when Morton Stadium will be opening?
Morton Stadium will be opening this week. I'm not sure whether it will be tomorrow or Thursday or Friday, but it is being worked upon. And I know I've had several inquiries other tracks around the country, just to keep everyone updated on that. Many of the third level tracks are obviously privately owned, and the third level institutions, universities and institutes of technology are currently closed. Most of them will not open this week, and it will take time before they do open. They need to complete risk assessments, they need to have staff on site, and we have initiated discussions with, I won't say all of the universities in third levels, but some of them to get tracks reopened, but that will take some time.
Perfect. And just one question there, maybe for yourself, Pat, in terms of facilities. So if a club doesn't own its own ground or facilities and trains, for instance, in a public park, can it return in this phase?
Yes, I mean, if there's no issue with access to the park, I'm thinking maybe if you're training there and it's open, then there shouldn't be an issue. I mean, normal club insurance is back, and as long as you're not moving into somewhere that maybe you're not allowed. So if it's a public park, perfect. If it's facilities that you're using with a local GA club or some other sporting organisation, I'm sure you've got permission. But no, that shouldn't be a problem.
Perfect. And we just have a couple more questions coming in here, so we'll just keep them to the last couple of questions now. Just in terms of the COVID-19 officer, just looking for clarity in terms of their duty. So if we had two groups, for instance, training on a track, how would the officer be expected to oversee the training?
I'll take that one if you want, Dara. It's going to be, there's a collective responsibility here for all involved in the return to sport, and this is a return to activity as opposed to return to competition. and their role is to promote and assist groups in maintaining social distancing. And sometimes it'll fall because groups get together as they approach a finish line or whatever. But their role is there to remind and to help the group to do the best it can to maintain the social distancing within their activities, and to remind groups. They will have they're not the police in that sense, but they're, you know, if we look upon it as we all have a responsibility here to do the best we can to maintain good practices around our return to sport, and their role is to remind coaches and athletes what that is, what that looks like, what that goal is, to ensure that we have a smooth transition through the phases and then start opening up wider as we go through into the autumn.
Perfect, thanks for that, Kieron. We might just take one or two more questions before we finish up. As I said, we will be available to answer any other specific questions that might come through. So I've put a link there to the Athletics Ireland contact page on the website. Hamish, just in terms of club insurance, just for those who are in a training group with a coach, or is it back to the normal insurance criteria?
The full insurances, our normal insurances, have already recommenced since Monday morning when the lockdown exit has commenced. So the public liability and the personal accident that we had before still exists. We've also negotiated some additional covers, which the information has been sent to the clubs, but it covers virtual races, runs or walks. So the cover now extends to those events as long as the course has been risk assessed by the club. It doesn't include high risk areas like trails, mountains, beaches, and that's for that insurance cover is now covered for those virtual races for adults only. And also remote group training. So for instance, if the club coach is on a Zoom, just like we are now, and you're carrying out some training with the coach as offering the oversight, then we have those covers in place as well. So we thank McMahon Galvin for negotiating those for us, because we appreciate that there has been a lot of virtual training and events going on, and there will be over the coming weeks as well.
Perfect, thanks Hamish. We might just have one final question, and I might leave this with yourself, Pat. It's again getting kind of back to facility use. So just if we're using a public or a shared track and non-members come onto the track, what should we do in that situation? Obviously there is some instances where it can't control, so I imagine it's down to the facility to manage that in some regard.
Yeah, I mean, and this goes back to the previous question as well. Anywhere that you're working within your group and the general public have access to, really, it's a question of being careful in as much as you can, avoiding contact and adhering to the normal rules of social distancing. So it's a question of being careful, being conservative, and hoping that will look after itself.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Pat. So look, as I said, we tried to get down through as many of the actual questions, specific questions that came into us over the last couple of days. If there is any other questions that members have, please feel free to get in touch with any of us in Athletics Ireland, and we'll forward it on to the relevant departments. So we might leave it there. Hamish, have you any last words in terms of our clubs for the next couple of months or so?
Thanks, Dara, and thanks everyone for attending tonight. I know how committed everyone is and how desperate we all are to get the clubs up and going, and also competition. I appreciate your commitment through these difficult times. I would say these guidelines are evolving and we're all learning. This is new to all of us. As I said earlier, we will have more information going up on the website tomorrow that will be also communicated to all your club secretaries in the morning. So there's some additional resources there to add to things like posters, things like an update on the event master system, and a number of other updates, information there for you. So please avail of those. Please keep the groups training hard and stay safe.
Perfect. So we'll conclude it there, guys. Again, thanks very much for everyone for logging on, and we will get this video up on our YouTube channel as soon as possible. So if you know anyone who couldn't make it and would benefit from seeing the few questions that the lad answered there, please feel free to share. So other than that, thanks very much, and stay safe.
Thank you.
That's it, yeah, it's over. Are you the only one left, Hamish, or is everyone else there?